Good morning, everyone. Today, back with Harry Potter and the Three Hallows by J.K. Rowling. Let's have vision at page 180 on Chapter 12, Magic is Might. Let's continue. Chapter 12, Magic is Might. As August wore on, the square of unkempt grass in the middle of the Grimmauld place shriveled in the sun until it was brittle and brown. The inhabitants of number 12 was never seen by anybody in the surrounding houses, and nor was the number 12 itself. The muggles who lived in Grimmauld Place had long since accepted the amusing mistake in the numbering that had caused number 11 to sit beside number 13, and yet the square was now attracting a trickle of visitors who seemed to find the anomaly most intriguing. Barely a day passed without one or two people arriving in Grimmauld Place with no other purpose. So it seems them to lean against the railing facing number 11 and number 13, watching the drawing between the two houses. The lurkers were never the same 2 days running, although they all seemed to share a dislike for normal clothing. Most of the Londoners who passed them were used to eccentric dresses and took little notice, though occasionally one of them made a glance back, wondering why anyone would wear such a long coat in this heat. The watchers seemed to be gleaning little satisfaction from their vigil. Occasionally, one of them starting forward excitedly, as if they had seen something interesting at last, only to fall back looking disappointed. On the first day of September, there was more people looking in the square than ever before. Half a dozen men in long cloaks stood silent and watchful, gazing as ever at the houses 11 and 13, but the thing for which they were waiting still appeared inconclusive as evening drew in, bringing with it an unexpected gust of chilly rain for the first time in weeks. There occurred one of those unexplicable moments, and when moments when they appeared to have seen something interesting. The man with a twisted face pointed at his closest companion, a portly, pallid man, started forward, but a moment later they had relaxed into their previous state of inactivity, looking frustrated and disappointed. Meanwhile, inside number 12, Harry had just entered the hall. He had nearly lost his balance as he apparated onto the top of the step just outside the front door, and thought that Death Eaters might have caught glimpse of his momentarily exposed elbow. Shuttering the front door carefully behind him, he pulled out his invisibility cloak, draped it over his arm, and hurried along the gloomy hallway towards the door that led to the basement, a sullen copy of the Daily Prophet clutched in his hand. The usual low whisper of Severus Snape greeted him. The chill wind swept him, and his tongue rolled up for a moment. "I didn't kill you," he said, once it had unrolled, then held his breath as the dusty Jinx figure exploded. He waited until he was halfway down the stairs to the kitchen, out of earshot of Mrs. Black, and clear of the stairs to the kitchen, just this cloud before calling, "I've got news, and you won't believe it." The kitchen was almost unrecognizable. Every surface now shone. Copper pots and pans had been burnished to a rosy glow. The wooden table on top gleamed. The goblets and plates already laid for dinner glinted in the light from a merrily blazing fire, on which a cauldron was simmered on the house elf, who came hurrying towards Harry, dressed in his snowy white towel, his hair as clean and fluffy as a cotton wool, Legolas's locket bouncing on his thin chest. "Shoes off, if you please, Master Harry." "Ahead. What before dinner?" croaked Creature, seizing the invisibility cloak and slouching off to hang it on a hook on the wall, beside a number of old-fashioned robes that had been freshly laundered. What happened? Ron asked apprehensively. He and Hermione had been poring over a sheaf of scribbled notes and hand-drawn maps that littered the end of the long kitchen table. But now they watched Harry as he strode towards them and threw down the newspaper on top of their scattered parchment. A large picture of a familiar hook-nosed, black-haired man stared up at them all beneath a headlight that read, Severus Snape confirmed as Hogwarts headmaster. No, said Ron and Hermione loudly. Hermione was quickest. She snatched up the newspaper and began to read the accompanying story out loud. Severus Snape, long-standing postmaster at Hogwarts School of Wizardry, was today appointed headmaster in the most important of several staffing changes at the ancient school. Following the resignation of the previous Muggle Studies teacher, Elector Carroll will take over the post while her brother, Amicus, fills the position of the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. I welcome the opportunity to uphold all famous wizarding traditions and values. The commenting murder and cutting off people's ears. I suppose. Snape, headmaster. Snape in Dumbledore's study. Merlin's hands, she shrieked, making both Harry and Ron jump. She leapt up from the table and hurtled from the room, shouting as she went, I'll be back in a minute. Merlin's pants? Repeated Ron, looking amused. She must be upset. He pulled the newspaper towards him and pursued the article about Snape. The other teacher won't stand for this. McGonagall and Flitwick and Sprout all know the truth. They know how Dumbledore died. They won't accept Snape as the headmaster. And how are these Carrolls? Death Eaters, said Harry. There are pictures of them out inside. They were at the top of the tower when Snape killed Dumbledore, so it's all friends together. And Harry went on bitterly, drawing up a chair. I can't see that the other teacher have got any choice but to stay. If the Ministry and Voldemort are behind Snape, it'll be a choice between staying and teaching for a nice few years in Azkaban. And that's if they're lucky. I reckon they'll stay to try and protect the students. Creature came bustling to the table with a large tureen in his hand and ladled out soup into the Princeton bowls, whistling between his teeth as he did so. Thanks, Creature, said Harry, flipping over the prophet so as not to have to look at Snape's face. Well, at least we know exactly where Snape is now. He began to spoon soup in his mouth. The quality of Creature's cooking had improved dramatically ever since he had given Regulus his locket. Today, French onion was as good as Harry had ever tasted. There are still a load of Death Eaters watching the house, he told Ron as he ate. More than usual. It's like they're hoping that we'll march out and carry our school trunks and head off the Hogwarts Express. Ron glanced at his watch. I've been thinking about that all day. It left nearly 6 hours ago. Weird, not being on it, isn't it? In his mind's eye, Harry seemed to see the Scarlet Stream engine as he and Ron had once followed it by air, shimmering between fields and hills, a rippling scarlet caterpillar. He was sure Ginny, Neville, and Luna were sitting together at this moment, perhaps wondering where he, Ron, and Hermione were, or debating how best to undermine Snape's new regime. They nearly saw me coming back in just now, Harry said. I landed badly on top of the step and the cloak slid. I do that every time. Oh, there she is, Ron added, craning around in his seat to watch Hermione re-entering the kitchen. And what in the names of Merlin's most baggy earphones that about? I remembered this, Hermione panted. She was carrying a large framed picture, which she now lowered to the floor before seizing a small beaded bag from the kitchen dresser. Opening it, she proceeded to force the painting inside, and despite the fact that it was patently too large to fit inside the tiny bag, within a few seconds it had vanished, like so much else, into the bag's capacious depth. Well, I think we'll leave it here, guys. On page 184. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time in the next video of Harry Potter and the Hallows by J.K. Rowling on chapter 12, Magic is Might. Bye.